Last week, I got back from Colorado, and I may or may not have visited a dispensary. I for sure got this shirt. It says, "Keep calm, you're just high." And then it has the elevation of Colorado. Get it? So I got back last week. How long does the active ingredient in marijuana, THC, y'all know what that is, THC? How long does that stay in a person's body? Anybody? 30 to 90, 10? Depends on body weight, depends if you are a chronic smoker or an occasional smoker. So let's just say I'm like in between. Let's just say, okay? So, I don't know, 15 days. So, let's say I drove here, right? And on my way home, I get pulled over, and I've been up since 4 a.m. Okay, so I'm gonna start to like really fade really fast here in an hour or so. So I'm really sleepy, I'm wobbly, and I failed their test that they make you do, and I'm going to refuse a breath test because that's what I do. And they go and test my blood, and it's in my system. Am I intoxicated? Because why? Because it's exactly. But that kind of scenario happens more than you think. Let me also add that I might have the smell on me. That's what'll get them to think that they should investigate me further. So, DWI is you can legally drive with marijuana in your system as long as you have not lost the normal use of your mental faculties. Does anyone know what that is? It's do you have an example of that? Like, oh. Like if you think you're really in San Marcos when you're in Austin, or you don't know what the exactly. So having lost the normal use of your mental faculties, and or having lost the normal use of your physical faculties. And the physical faculties are things like, walking in a line and standing on one foot. So ah, that I don't think that's a real test, but
That's an actual sentence. That your body knows where things are at, and that's how some of their inebriation tests are based off of.
really, I did not know that.
You have more than 5 seconds.
How many do you have?
Some of them exact number, but I don't. Some of them are like the pressure.
Gotcha.
Pressure is acceptable.
So, if you have shown that you don't have the normal use of your mental faculties and or physical faculties, and you have marijuana in your system, you could be arrested. Let's do this. What are some of the things that marijuana could affect your driving? Your reaction time. What else? I'm sorry? Falling asleep. Yep. Easily distracted.
Not doing the speed limit.
Driving really slow.
7 under.
Yeah.
Always 7 under.
So studies out there are inconclusive as to whether or not the use of marijuana actually makes you a worse driver. There are some studies that say that yes, that causes more accidents, and there are some studies that say that makes you actually more cautious because you're super hyper aware of, not wanting to mess up, and you're going really slow. So I want to talk to you about how, if you are arrested for marijuana DWI, what should you do? Okay? Okay, yes. Yes. 512-472-1113. Okay. 512-472-1113. I think we're going to hand out some cards. All right? But on the side of the road, you've got the handcuffs on, And you don't have a right at that time to make a phone call to a lawyer, okay? That's been heavily litigated. You just don't have that right on the side of the road. So they're going to ask you if you want to give, they may ask you if you want to give a breath test, all right? And here's my advice to you. If you know that you have not had anything to drink, alcohol's not your thing, all right? You have not had anything to drink, then go ahead and give a breath test. You're going to blow, double zeros because you're not going to have any alcohol in your system, and then you won't be subject to a license suspension. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay. If they ask you for a blood test, my advice to you, and this is what I would do, if I have been smoking, I will refuse. That is your right to refuse a blood test or a breath test. It's your right to refuse, okay? And so by doing that, you are forcing them to see if they could get a warrant for your blood. Sometimes they're not allowed to get it. You don't know if they can get it or not. So I have to tell you that refusing to give a blood test voluntarily will subject you to a 6-month license suspension, but that's not something that you would need to worry about if you have a lawyer. That lawyer can get you what's called an occupational license to drive, for work and groceries and that sort of thing. What you don't want to do is voluntarily give evidence against yourself. So that would be what I would do. If I knew that I had something on board, I would refuse to voluntarily give a blood specimen. It could be the case that they get a judge to sign a warrant and take your blood anyway, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the judge will turn them down. Sometimes there are certain nights where they're not allowed to ask. Certain cops, like beat cops, they don't get to ask for warrants unless it's a no refusal weekend. So that's what I would do. Then, sorry? Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, how would an officer go about determining whether or not you should be arrested? So there is this program in the police academy. It's called Drug Recognition Expert, and they train certain officers to recognize certain things. And so if you have dilated pupils, what else do they look for? Rapid breathing, rapid heart rate. They look for red, glassy, bloodshot eyes. They look for something called a green tongue. Has anyone ever seen anyone? You have?
When I had a cop come to me once and tell me that my friend was high because her tongue was green, she had never smoked before. So it's something that I've had used against me even though it wasn't valid.
Was it actually green?
No, it's like.
Well, she loves Slurpees too, right?
Oh. So I have spent some time with people that have smoked marijuana, and I've asked to see their tongue, and I've never seen a green tongue. So I don't know if. All right. So, okay, turn to your neighbor and ask to see their tongue. If you have a green tongue, can you come up here? I've never seen one, but but these are things that the drug recognition experts are looking for. And if you exhibit some of these or all of these things, then they think that you have been smoking marijuana, and they're going to go and administer these tests to you. And these tests involve walking heel to toe, 9 steps up, 9 steps back in a straight line. It also involves standing on one leg, which I'm not going to try to do, not for any reason other. I'm wearing heels. Haven't really been doing anything tonight. I mean, it's a school night. I'm sorry, what? For as long as the cop says, usually 30 seconds, okay? And if you do certain things, like you use your arms for balance, or you keep you put your foot down even once, or you hop, or you sway, then that counts against you, okay? If you are walking heel to toe and you miss even one step touching heel to toe, that counts against you. If you turn around the wrong way, that counts against you. And so they're looking for these things that you're probably going to do wrong. If you do them wrong, then if they have enough clues, you're going to be arrested for DWI. I'm sorry?
What if you have a physical disability that prevents you from operating?
That's a question that they do ask you before they administer the test, but they say, are you sick or injured? They don't actually say, do you have a disability? So you have to understand that question, are you sick right now? Are you injured right now? To mean, yes, I have a disability. Yeah. Okay. So in addition to that, there are other kind of driving behaviors that could lead an officer to have what's called probable cause to arrest you. Weaving, if you fail to stop at a stoplight or a traffic signal, swerving, driving too slowly is a very big clue. Being asleep in your car. All of these things combined with what an officer feels you having lost your normal use of your physical faculties or mental faculties can get you arrested. Well, yes, also having marijuana in your car is not...
Keep it in a jar.
In a jar?
Yeah, because that'll control the smell much better than that.
That's okay. So he's saying keep it in a jar. This is not coming from me. This is coming from someone else. I had a client that kept his marijuana in an Altoid container, and that didn't deter anything. And that's supposed to be the strongest mint ever. So yeah. So what if they do get your blood, okay, and it shows THC? What does that prove? Here's what it doesn't show. It doesn't show when you smoked. It doesn't show how much you smoked. It doesn't even show if you are still feeling the effects of it. So basically, it just tells them that you're a stoner. I mean, I don't know. I'm sorry?
Sometime within the last 8 weeks, you smoke.
Exactly. And that's pretty much one of the ways that Charlie and I defend DWI marijuana, okay, is that they still have to show impairment. And just because you can't stand on one leg doesn't mean that you are intoxicated. Because whatever number they come up with in your blood, and they measure THC nanograms per milliliter. But there's no there's not like a .08 is for alcohol. There's nothing here in Texas. There's no level that says per se you are intoxicated, by marijuana. For instance, Colorado, their marijuana limit, their THC limit is I think it's 5 nanograms per milliliter, which Texas doesn't even have anything like that, so there's nothing to compare it to. So a number will come back, but what does that mean to anybody here in Texas? It doesn't mean anything. So then they have to switch gears and try to prove you were intoxicated by having lost the normal use of your mental faculties and or physical faculties. And so one of our arguments is that our client wasn't actually impaired, and that they just can't walk a straight line, or they have a disability, or they're clumsy, or something like that. Other ways that we have successfully defended DWI, the officer didn't have what's called a reasonable suspicion to stop you in the first place. For instance, officers, they don't study the law like lawyers do. They do go to the police academy. But did you know that if you're entering a freeway and it's a merge, there's no requirement to have a blinker to merge? And so if an officer had stopped our client for that and then it turned into a DWI investigation and then arrest, well, the stop is bad because my client didn't do anything that was against the law to begin with. We have argued that there was no evidence driving the vehicle. If the person was, outside of the vehicle at the time, they don't know when they were actually operating the vehicle. There's no evidence, I already said this, that the person was impaired. But also, and Jamie alluded to this, the results of the blood test were contaminated or they should be thrown out. Not every blood test is 100%. Not anything is 100%. There's always going to be room for error, and we can find that error if there is one. Your blood was drawn without your consent or without a warrant. So if they don't get a warrant and they don't have your consent and they drew your blood anyway, that blood has to go. Okay? It doesn't get used against you. The blood test was not properly administered. If the person drawing your blood did not follow the protocol, we argue that that blood cannot be used against you. So those are some of the ways that we have defended DWI marijuana. The penalties are the same as if it were alcohol. So first, DWI, if you are convicted, the punishment range is between 3 and 180 days in jail and up to a $2,000 fine. Now, a first DWI can be enhanced to a felony if there are certain things present, like if you have a child in the car that's 15 or younger, even though that's your first DWI, that's actually going to be a state jail felony where the punishment is up to 2 years state jail. If there was a serious bodily injury or even a death, that does, even if it's your very first time, does kick it up to the felony range. A second DWI, though, is up to a year in jail and up to a $4,000 fine. And then if you have a third or more, that's going to be a third-degree felony where you're looking at 2 to 10 and a $10,000 fine, up to a $10,000 fine. So I think that is all I have to tell you. I'm sure y'all have questions, but you wrote them on the pad, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mary Ann. I want to riff on a couple of things that Mary Ann was just talking about. When I was initially talking about the definition of intoxication, I was talking about the .08 versus the loss of the normal use. And just to expound a little bit further, because it's going to dovetail into what these other states' laws and the sorts of things that we're looking at, you heard Mary Ann use the phrase a per se. The per se limit for alcohol is that .08 that you have heard about your whole lives. Well, actually, depending on how old you are, you used to hear that it was .10. I'm old enough to have not only remembered that, but practiced back in those days. But the federal government literally blackmailed all the states. The states get to decide on their own that issue because DWI is not a federal issue, but the feds passed a law that said, basically, if your per se limit is higher than .08, then you aren't going to get these funds, these highway funds. And wouldn't you know, however many states hadn't lowered it to .08, immediately lowered it to .08 in record time. But when she's talking about per se levels, let's just analogize it to alcohol first, okay? One of the things that, one of the common defenses in an alcohol blood test, say the client is .22, okay? You can only present this defense if there's some sort of, you can only credibly present this defense if there's some sort of probably video evidence for it. But imagine a scenario, because we've all probably had these types of cases, certainly in the .15, .18 range, and I've probably had some in the .22 range, where you look at the client doing the field sobriety tests, and they're doing better than I would do at them. They're doing better than I would have done them when I was 20 and 100 pounds lighter. I mean, they look really good, but they're a .22. So it's called the disconnect defense, which is, they want you to believe this stinking machine and not your lying eyes. Look at that video. I don't know what the blood alcohol level is of the person on that video, but I know it's not 0.22 because they did so great on everything. You know, if you were 0.22, you would be, that's the argument. You would be falling down drunk or whatever the scenario might be. Okay, so when you're trying a case like that, I can pretty much guarantee you that unless the prosecutor skipped baby prosecutor school, and yes, that is a thing, that one of the things they're going to talk about in jury selection is Bubba. They like to call him Bubba. Hey, does anybody know someone that, and this one isn't Bubba, they start with this. Does anybody know someone that would drink one drink and then look like they'd lost the normal use of their mental and physical faculties? Okay, I hear some yeses, right, from people that are saying it would be me or that you know someone like that. So then they talk about how even if that person wasn't a .08, the judge is going to instruct that if you think, doesn't matter what you think about the blood, if you think that the alcohol impaired them in that way and that that's what caused it, that they can convict you even if you're under a .08. But they're facing, and they'll give that example in the jury selection. But where they're really leading is this. They then say, and everybody knows somebody named Bubba who can drink 18 beers, and they look just fine. And they might not make it that exaggerated, but then they'll ask, and people will say, oh, yeah, I know, my cousin can drink, da-da-da-da, and you can never tell. So they're trying to prepare ahead of time for what they know we're going to have to come in and say, which is you should believe your eyes and not the lion stinking machine, right? So what I did is, and I've got to give a really big caveat on this, I think. Does that defense work all the time? Unfortunately, I would say close to rarely. But it's I would say less than 50% of the time. Most of the time, the jury is going to say something like, Mr. Spencer, I thought you did a really good job, man. I believed everything you said, but I mean, 0.18 is higher than 0.08. And I'm like, well, okay, so you aren't really listening to all the things I said about the machine. I don't actually say that out loud, but I mean, it's a tough defense. Look, I do represent some guilty people, right? I mean, it does happen. You'd like to think occasionally, but I mean, it's the best you've got, and you know what? In some cases, it is absolutely true. So that's what we do. We defend people. But yeah, that's a tough sell. I mean, the real deal here, guys, is it's cheaper to rent a helicopter to fly you home than it is to get arrested for DWI. So, I mean, don't put yourself in the position in the first place. And believe me, any of the three of, and by the way, that would be if we represented you for free. You'd still be better off with the helicopter. So, I mean, just all the other charges, surcharges, occupational driver's license, reinstatement fees, SR-22 insurance, and God forbid you go on probation, $100 a month for up to 2 years, all sorts of other things, increased insurance rates. Yeah, it is expensive, so do everything you can, and it is dangerous. I mean, I've represented people who have on intoxication manslaughter where there was a death involved, and you don't want that. So here endeth the lesson, or here endeth the lecture on that, but that's really what you should be taking. But again, remember, we're talking about once the Texas legislature fully realizes, because they're coming close to halfway realizing, that marijuana is going to be legal in Texas, that the people will demand that they do it, or that they'll vote them out of office. What I'm talking about tonight is what are they going to do with the DWI laws and the per se laws, where they want to be able to come in and say, if Jamie is, whether it's 5 nanograms per milliliter, whether or not it's the Delta-9 THC or the metabolite. See, metabolites are things are basically leftovers. You can consume things, whether they're marijuana or other things. There are chemical processes that go on the body that break those things up, and then the body leaves leftovers, which can also be tested for. And it's those that stay in the system the longest. And so it's, in my opinion, it's dangerous when states write laws that include that sort of thing. But let's talk about specifically what's going on in some other ones. Here's one, Washington State. This one is extremely simple, and this is an example where simple is different than a good one. They simply have a point. Did I do that right? I may have. Remember I said the thing about me being a Texas lawyer, not a Washington lawyer? It says 0.5 nanograms per milliliter if I cut and pasted that, that's right. It's possible that's 5 nanograms per milliliter, but the problem with it is they're trying to use the Bubba analogy. I mean, I will agree with the state in principle that some people can drink and be higher than 0.08 and not really show signs other than their blood test of intoxication, right? So what they want to be able to do is say, okay, we got this guy out of the car, and assuming somehow they followed the correct processes, you either agreed to, which I agree with Marianne, don't, or they forcibly took your blood. They don't want to have to worry about that situation. If you look great, and remember, when you're talking about either the active ingredient or the metabolites, those things can stay around for a long time. So obviously, what the state is, whenever the state is criminalizing something that in part should be criminalized, but it covers all sorts of other behaviors, which it's just nonsense to criminalize, what you have is what we've got in the United States, which is an over-incarceration problem. Legislators come and, somebody has something terrible happens to somebody somewhere, and so we have to pass a law to target exactly this, and then it covers a bunch of other situations that it's not applicable to. Okay, so Montana. This one actually surprised me. I clicked on Montana and I thought, oh, I'm not going to like this one. This might be, of the ones they have, my favorite. If a driver, and this is, by the way, for their alcohol one, but I'm analogizing it to a potential way to do it for marijuana. If a driver has an alcohol concentration of 0.04 or less, it may be inferred that the driver wasn't under the influence. If the driver has an alcohol concentration of between 0.04 and 0.08, that fact may not give rise to any inference that the driver was or wasn't under the influence, but the fact may be considered with other evidence in determining the guilt or innocence of the driver. And then third, if the driver has an alcohol concentration of 0.08 or more, it may be inferred that the driver was under the influence of the alcohol. This inference is rebuttable. So, even for alcohol in Montana, they've got this leveled system, and even at the very highest of it, even if you're a 0.08, it's less automatic for the jury to have to convict you. There's still an out. Now, I tell clients this on a fairly regular basis, even at the first meeting. And I often preface it by saying, I don't have a good bedside manner about things, but I'm going to tell you what I think is good and bad about your case. I mean, if we get the videotape and we look at it, and if we can be objective about it, we say to ourselves, I can't believe that guy was operating a motor vehicle. I'm not going to win the case no matter what happens. I mean, if the jury, yes, there are situations where somebody could have marijuana in their system, and that's a rebuttable presumption, wherein if there were some form of reasonable number for them to try to make a per se limit in the first place, the first thing I would say about that is Texas definitely needs, if we got to the point where we knew something like that was going to pass, we would have to think about ways of lessening it to make it so that essentially smoking a joint on the first of the month made driving for the next 4 to 8 weeks illegal, right? So, again, that's something that we may be potentially looking at in the future. North Carolina has a zero tolerance per se drug driving law, enacted for Schedule I controlled substances and their metabolites. Remember, the metabolites are the things that stay in even longer, and so it's much harder from a scientific standpoint to be able to take a look at that result and figure out what the time of consumption was. That's the difference between alcohol and marijuana, really, when we're talking about all of this. Alcohol dissipates very quickly. If you truly are, just assume the machine is correct, which none of them are correct all of the time, and some of them are not correct a lot of the time. But assume that you are a .09. You didn't drink that alcohol yesterday. It's fairly recent that you've been consuming alcohol for you to be at that level. Ohio has 3 different limits: 2 nanograms per milliliter in blood, if it's THC, the active ingredient. If it's the metabolite, they've at least bothered to up it to 50 nanograms per milliliter of blood. Or if the person is exhibiting signs of impairment due to the influence of drugs, alcohol, or some combination, that's similar to our having lost the normal use of your mental and physical faculties portion of our DWI statute. Then they make the marijuana metabolite concentration 5 nanograms per milliliter of blood. Now, I appreciate that they're at least considering that there are other situations that can go on here, but that's a ridiculously convoluted statute statutes don't need to be written that way. They need to be written with common sense. And common sense tells you, if we can pretty much tell that this guy that, yes, we took his blood an hour later. It takes a while for them to get the blood, right? But because it's alcohol, we know they can attempt what's called retrograde extrapolation in that case and say, well, he probably would have been higher, lower, or something like that. But forget the .09. If you're a .15 at 2 a.m. at the station and you were pulled over at 1 a.m., you weren't under .08 at the time. You might have been under .15, but you weren't under .08, right? So these are all issues that we're going to need to think about some moving forward as we get more and more successful decriminalizing marijuana in Texas. All right, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. He is Charlie Roadman. He graduated with a bachelor's in history from Trinity in 1992, graduated from the University of Texas School of Law as a lawyer in 2001. I'm pretty sure I've known him that entire time. Of course, he's members of all sorts of associations: Austin Criminal Defense Lawyer, Texas Criminal Defense Lawyer, Travis County Bar. Here's 2 goodies for you. State certified instructor for the DWI education program. Are you the only lawyer that has ever done this? Okay, he says I'm not the only one, which he means there's somebody in Hawaii. What that means is he went through the training to teach the class that people have to take when they're convicted of DWI. He also did that for the drug offender education program. But do y'all remember that I said that he graduated undergrad in 92, and then, law school is only 3 years. He graduated law school in 2001, so he must have been doing something in between 1992 and 1998. And I'm pleased to tell you my trivia about Charlie Roadman right before I bring him up, and that is, in the interim there, at least for a few years, he was in a band in San Antonio named Evergreen for all the correct reasons. And he actually played this stage about 4 or 5 times in maybe 1995, 1996, something like that. So it's been a while, but please welcome back to the stage my friend, my colleague, Charlie Roadman. Oh, and he's the one that wrote the book that we're raffling.
Thank you. I did used to give this lecture called Marijuana Law for Musicians back probably 2003 to 2010, back when it was a little edgier, when it wasn't legal anywhere. and so I stopped doing it because it's not quite as important at this stage. Now, the way I would teach this hour-long lecture, it was kind of like stand-up comedy with education, and I would use the story of Matthew McConaughey's naked bongo arrest, which I think most people are familiar with, and I would have the probable cause affidavit, and we'd sort of use him to describe how marijuana has been prosecuted in Travis County, over the years. And just something that's important about his arrest, right, is the police, or Matthew was really mad when they arrested him. He was so mad he would not put on his clothes. So he's naked, and his clothes are right there at his feet, and the officers are like, "Put on your clothes." And he looked at them and he said, "Fuck you." Over and over again. And so they dragged him out to the car naked. Okay, and I've never seen this in 20 years of a grown, not even insane people going naked to jail. He goes to jail naked. And they eventually convince him to put on clothes. Thank goodness, because I think the next step was to get roughed up a bit. But one of the reasons he was so mad was that they went into his house without a warrant. Okay, so he's playing naked bongos with his buddy, and all of a sudden they bust in. Now the police write down, the probable cause affidavit's 2 pages long, and they spent a long time working on it because it's mostly grammatically correct. Okay, so they really thought about it. I know I could just see him with the supervisors going, "Crap, what are we going to say? What are we going to say?" Because the officer, and they still wrote this even after thinking about it. They wrote down that they knocked on the door, and the music was so loud that that Matthew couldn't hear. So we just went in the door. Okay, so they wrote that down, which is crazy. I mean, it's true, right? I mean, they had to write what was true because this was going to be a big case, and they couldn't just blatantly lie on the probable cause affidavit. So, and of course, as we're all music fans, the question I would have asked was, well, officer, you're aware that songs do end, right? So it was going to be quiet in a minute or two, So anyway, so Matthew, of course, got his case dismissed. Without really having to do anything after 6 to 8 months of just sort of letting it lie low. Okay. Now I'm going to come back to Matthew because I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and why I wrote the book, and Matthew is still just a fantastic tool for a narrative tool. But I do want to tell another little story about a client I had about 10 years ago, and he's a young guy, 17, and he kept getting arrested for possession of marijuana in his car, and we get it dismissed, and a month later get another one, get it dismissed, and then another one. And so finally I said, do you want some advice? And he said, "Yes, Mr. Odom, I do." And I said, "Well, take the rims off your car." Okay. And he said, okay, I'll do that. Okay. 3 months later, he gets arrested again, and I sort of walk out to the parking lot with him, and his car has this rims, and I'm like, "Dude, I told you to take those rims off the car." And he said, "I did. That's my grandmother's car." So now, okay, so how do we get his case dismissed? And so one of the things I wrote this book about, and I'm really not trying to sell you the book, I just want to describe it's called The Defendant's Guide to Defense: How to Help Your Lawyer Get the Best Result. Okay, misdemeanor edition. That's very important. Okay, everyone asks about the felony edition, and I said, well, I'm just going to put in there, to build a time machine, go back in time and don't commit that felony. That's what the felony is. But so one of the things that from doing this 18, 19 years, I've figured out, okay, well, first of all, we're in a really good town, okay? And of course, basically any college town is going to be above average in terms of marijuana. So we are working with the judges in Travis County. 99% of them are very good people, and the prosecutors even they're not crazy. Okay, they're not, it's not Williamson County or Hayes County. I mean, they're people that we can talk to. And one of the things that I wrote the book about is, so how to get your attorney things that helps him or her get the case dismissed, okay? And that's sometimes difficult for us to convince our clients to do things, which is kind of amazing, right? They pay us a bunch of money, we tell them what to do, and they don't do it. And that's a little weird, okay? But, has anyone ever, Gretchen Rubin, this author, okay, she's kind of a self-help author, but really smart lady. She describes these 4 types of people, okay, and this is when I heard her description of this, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, so the first type of person is called an upholder, okay, and that's a person that follows the rules, the external rules and the internal rules, okay, so those are like judges. Okay, the judges all follow the rules, and even the internal rules are like where they decide they're going to go to law school, and they just do it, and they can follow that stuff. The second type of person is what's called an obliger, okay, and that person follows external rules, but not necessarily the internal one. So an obliger will stop at the stop sign. They'll do all the things they're supposed to do, but an internal thing, such as I'm going to go on a diet. Or I'm going to exercise, they don't necessarily follow those rules, okay? So they follow the external. The third type is what's in this room, okay, myself included, are questioners, okay? And questioners only want to do something once they understand why it's important, okay? So anyone that is smoking marijuana in a state that it's not legal is a questioner. You've analyzed the situation and you go, this doesn't make any sense, so I'm going to do it. Okay, so and then the fourth category, so I finish it out, are rebels, and they do whatever they want whenever they want. There's nothing I can do with them. Okay, so there's probably some rebels in here too. But most people are this combination of obliger and questioner, and they're sort of mixed around. But like I said, the judges and prosecutors are all upholders. Okay, now, so if we go back to Matthew, Matthew's a questioner, right? He doesn't understand why he has to put on his clothes. He doesn't understand why they're in his house, and so he's not going to comply. So what I wrote the book about is trying to convince people to do some things to help me get their case dismissed. So marijuana right now, even though it's way better than it was 18 years ago. Okay, when I started, a basic plea was probation. Okay, even Travis County wanted probation, or they wanted deferred probation on a marijuana case. But every 5 years it goes down and down and down. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar that basically right now, in a lot of situations, not all of them, but a lot of them, if you get the citation, you go to JP5 and you take a 4-hour class and they dismiss your case. Now, only certain law enforcement agencies are doing the citation, so if you get pulled over by Bee Caves PD or Westlake PD, those guys are not going to do it, but APD, if they're not mad at you, okay, might consider giving you the citation to take the 4-hour class. Now, the three of us have gotten, 5,000 marijuana cases dismissed in Travis County. Most of them, though, our clients do something, okay? So even though we're at this getting better and better and better, if I go to the prosecutor and say, dismiss my case, but we're not doing nothing, they say no. We're not just going to dismiss it for nothing. Now, so basically, as for the last 18 years, what Jamie, Marianne, and I have done is you just try to convince your clients to do a little bit more, combined with the argument over whether the legality of the arrest. But it's important for us to convince our clients to do these things, and so that's what the book's about. For the questioners, basically, is what I'm trying to get to. So that's really basically all I wanted to talk about, Jamie. And I think we're going to do a Q&A.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it. If you'll just stay up here. Marianne, if I could bring you up just for a minute as well. We don't have a ton of questions, which is good because we don't have a ton of time. I'm going to toss some out here, and we'll try to sort of answer them. Which of you two wants what I consider one of the best and one of the most interesting questions? I'm gonna let you know. I think it's the easiest question as well. Do either of you have any thoughts on who wants to take a stab at it? I'll tell you what. Either one of you step up and tell me what you think about this question, because I really like it. I mean, it may not be completely relevant, but I'm still going to read it. Big business, special interest groups, scary or not? Okay, I'll answer it. Yeah, I say scary. Again, I'm a little surprised by the question itself, but okay. All right. We actually talked about this next question a little bit amongst ourselves, and it took us several minutes to discuss everything, so we may kind of condense that down. Since hemp has been descheduled and is now an over-the-counter supplement, what legal protections would someone within the system, probation, parole, have if they have a positive UA while having a prescription for hemp oil? There's a pharmacy filling the prescriptions written by physicians, just in case you're wondering. I'll start if y'all want to add something. That would be great. The first issue is this question is asking about a potential probation revocation, which is very different than an initial offense. You don't get a jury trial. You get a judge. It's just one person. They've heard it 1,000 times. It wasn't marijuana or whatever. Right? And you don't get the legal protection of beyond a reasonable doubt, whatever that means. I mean, that doesn't come at a specific percentage, but it comes at the 50-50 percentage. The judge is only having to decide whether they believe more likely than not that that this was something other than what you're saying it is. Now, one thing we did discuss is as a practical matter, and this isn't just with, I mean, I think this is... Well, I'm not sure even if this is a Texas question, but there are other prescribed substances that can pop for other illegal drugs as well, other than marijuana. And what a defense lawyer does in those scenarios is they advise them to talk to the probation or parole officer in advance about it. And sometimes you can actually just get that cleared by showing the prescription and those sorts of things, and then you sort of get a waiver on that in the first place. That's going to be a ton more effective than trying to come in after the fact and saying, oh, no, look at this, right? That's being proactive about it. That's similar to, Charlie's, help your lawyer help you. Help me help you by not having to call me in the first place. Did anybody want to add anything to that?
I would add that the judges and probation officers have heard every excuse about 50,000 times. So that's the problem is just convincing them that you're telling the truth. It's just nearly impossible, you know. And also normal, I think, would be a special interest group, right? So some of them are positive.
Okay, some of them are scary and some of them aren't. But yeah, what Charlie was saying, it doesn't mean that it's not true. Back to sort of the DWI and alcohol situations that we were talking about before, all three of us, and I didn't even ask him this question, all three of us have represented people who have had to put the ignition interlock alcohol blow hootie in their car and who have come up for alcohol on it and had trouble with pretrial, tell the judge you need to revoke this bond and put this person in jail, where we, as much as we can ever know anything, at least completely believe the client that in this particular case it wasn't alcohol because of other factors that we could affirmatively prove. I can't imagine y'all aren't going to nod your head and say you've represented those people, right? Right. Now, I'll tell you this too. I think you will agree with this as well. Probably more than 50% of the people that blow alcohol into the blow hootie were actually consuming alcohol, right? And remember, I told you it's a 50-50 level in the first place, so it's an uphill battle. Be proactive about it. What will happen to individuals incarcerated for marijuana-related reasons? I mean, the same things I'm not trying to be a smart aleck, the same things that'll happen to anybody that's incarcerated for anything. But I tell you what, please, if there's more to it, I'm not trying to make fun of your question. Come and ask me later, because that may be too general for me to know exactly what you're driving at. Any thoughts?
Expungement question, I didn't write it, but it seems like an expungement question, like Illinois expunged 11,000 records.
Oh, thank you for reading that correctly for me. That is absolutely what the person meant. I see it now, even though you weren't the person that wrote it. So, you remember I was talking about, tonight we're talking about some future issues. Absolutely. We will still, well, even if marijuana became fully legal, just to grow unregulated in your backyard, which isn't outrageous. I mean, it's a plant. You can grow tomatoes in your backyard. Even if that were to happen in this session, another thing that we would then be working on is what other states have done is to try to go back and do the mass expunctions of all the prior criminal histories. I'm sure that'll be a fight too. I mean, I think, sometimes Texas takes longer to do things. Yes, you might. And I think there's actually theoretically other ways you could do it. It's hard to imagine this right now with the situation we're in. I think you could have a governor's pardon of everybody, which would, if that were possible, then that would absolutely lead to expungibility. So I think there are some other things, but yeah, there's some hoops to jump through on that. So that's actually a great question. Thank you for pointing out what it actually meant. Any thoughts on that? What if my employee is caught outside of my business smoking a joint? My business is a head shop. Anybody? Who catches them? Let's assume it's a police officer.
I don't think it would make any difference. I mean, they would just arrest them the same way if it was in front of a pizza joint. Your public business, like, can they just walk in? They would have to get a warrant to do that. So, yeah. Now, as Matthew McConaughey would tell you, they don't always do that.
And unlike Matthew McConaughey, because he has certain advantages in life that none of us do put on your clothes and go ahead and let them in, because if they even if somehow you could know that they didn't have a proper warrant, once it gets to that point, you have to let the lawyer litigate that afterwards in terms of the warrant issue and those sorts of things. Happy to talk to you afterwards as well if there's more questions about that. Am I supposed to wrap up at 9:45-ish?
Yeah, we have to do the raffle.
Right. So we got to do the raffle. Yes, right. So I know there's some other questions. Please, if you ask them and you're still interested in trying to get an answer, please come talk to me or Mary Ann or Charlie, and thank you to them for showing up. Thank you. You guys can sit down for now. I am going to introduce our final speaker, our executive director, Jax Finkel. She's going to be doing events, and we will be giving away the 4 prizes. Please welcome Jax Finkel.
Hello. I was sitting cross-legged and like my right foot's asleep, and it's really weird. I thought I'd share that with you guys. Hi, it's Overshare 2020. I want to start off talking a little bit about some upcoming events we have throughout this year. I put together a blog post yesterday with links to all of the things that I'm about to talk about. So if you go to texasnormal.org, go to our blog feed. You can find all of this information. Of course, you guys know that we're here at the beautiful Flamingo Cantina every month. And next month for the open meeting, we will be hosting a candidate forum for all of the primary candidates running in the Democratic and Republican primaries in the greater Austin area. We've already had about a dozen candidates respond, so we anticipate that it will be pretty busy. Also, a special item of note, the doors doors will open early that night. Typically, the doors open at 8, and we start at 8:30. However, the doors will open at 7, and we will start at 7:30. Additionally, we are putting together the primary voting guide so that you can look back at the incumbents' voting records and all of the candidates who responded, what their responses are to the 6 different questions that we asked them on the questionnaire. They also do get to do some comments of their own as well, and we expect that that'll be out late January, depending on. The deadline for them to respond is next week, but it will take time to compile all that information, get it up on a website, and make it pretty and ready for you guys to look at it. South by Southwest. Who's going to be around for South by Southwest? Oh, is it because you guys live in Austin? Well, Texas Normal is pretty lucky to be able to be doing not only an unofficial, but an official South by Southwest event this year. If you guys were around last year, you might remember that we did a Texas Cannabis Kickoff event where we had vendors and speakers and music here at Flamingo Cantina, and we're going to be doing it again, and this time it will be on the 18th of March. Then the following day, on the 19th, will be our official South by Southwest meetup, and our focus is changing cannabis policy in Texas. So all of the people who are at South by Southwest who want to chat about actual policy change and how you can actually affect laws in Texas, that's where to be at. As you probably know, there's last I looked, 40, 45 panels about cannabis. Some of them really thoughtful, awesome panels. Some of them about how decriminalization ruins legal markets. What? I don't know about that. Then in April, it's going to be 420 all month. And on Double 420, which, if you don't know, is April 4th of 2020, it's Saturday, we'll be out at Willie Nelson's golf course doing our veteran benefit, which we do out there. Yes, we love Willie. We appreciate him having us out there. So we are going to be having volunteer needs that we need filled for that. We'll be looking for sponsors. We're working on lining up all of the music now, so that's going to be shaping up really nicely. And of course, it goes to benefit all of the work that we do with veterans across the state in Texas, which on a separate note, we are, or our sister organization, Foundation for an Informed Texas, is going to be putting together 3 veterans seminars across the state in Tarrant County, New Braunfels, and Waco, and then it's going to culminate in a statewide conference here in Austin. So if you or any of your family are veterans and you'd like to participate in that, Informed Texas will be putting out information about that shortly. And then we're going to have more monthly meetings because we're amazing. And in October, that one will also be a candidate forum because that will be in advance of the general election, which is going to be in November on the 3rd. If you go to texasnormal.org/voters guide, voters guide, one word, no dash, you can actually see what the incumbents' records are and also find the 3 things you need to do to prepare for the primaries, registering to vote, all of those good quick links there for you. And I would also have you save the date. October 24th is going to be our members mixer. As you guys know, it's a party only for our members, and it's private, and it's catered with the most amazing food. So you guys have to, yes, queen, that lamb is to die. And then once the general election happens, if you guys are not aware, less than a week later, legislators are going to start pre-filing bills. We're already looking at a lot of different drafts and giving feedback to some of these legislators. So I do anticipate, we had 60 plus bills last session. It's not going to be less, I anticipate. So, and then the actual legislative session is going to begin on the 12th of January in 2021. So before we do the raffle, which will be, can I just do it? Okay, cool, I get to raffle all 4 things. But before we do that, I did want to mention that this Monday, Texas Normal released our first ever podcast. Yes. And it featured me fun. But our hosts are Les and Dave, and they are going to be, yes, they are awesome. Les is doing a lot of the recording and editing. Dave is doing interviewing, and they have, I think, most of season 1 almost recorded, and they are going to continue to work on putting these out every other week. So there's different ways to subscribe if you go to texasnormal.org. Okay, now I'm ready to give things away. Where's the books? Okay. The name of this book is basically like, let me help you help yourself. People, don't self-incriminate. God. Okay. We're going to start with the book. One book per poll. Does that make sense? Lisa Zapata. Come and get your book. Thank you. All right, next I'm actually going to do the little giveaway swag bag. We're going to mix it up. Inside this sparkly bag is a pebble pipe from Grav Labs. It's also got one of the little donut pinch hitters and a cutesy little nug jar from 420 Science. So cute little thing. And the winner is I don't know if that's the right term. Okay. Mike Murphy. Do you like the marijuana? Okay. Next will be for a book, and then I'll pull one more time, and that'll be it. Jeff Mayo. Jeff? Is there a Jeff Mayo in the house? I don't know if I'm saying your last name right. I'm going to say that's a no. Okay, let's do another one. Jim Foster? Jim Foster. Is everybody smoking up on the patio without me? I mean, listen, Linda, hold up 3 minutes. I'll be right. I said Jim. And I said Jeff before that. I'm pretty sure that's not your name. I know, like, and Jennifer. Y'all. I'm Jennifer. You're Jennifer. I'm Jennifer. Okay. What number am I thinking of? 298. 22. Okay, one more number, and if you cannot think of the number that I'm thinking of, listen. You're pretty close.
18.
Does like nobody dab? 710. Who said it? Okay. Thank you. That's going on. All right, listen, everybody. Flamingo Cantina is awesome. Let's give them a big round of applause. Angela is amazing. She's